Everybody, it's straight up at the top of the hour. And so, yes, feel free to keep adding your location, temperature, and your role into the chat. But I'm going to go ahead and let these guys go ahead and get started on our session for this afternoon.
Thank you, Maureen. Welcome, everybody. We're really excited that you could join us in this last session of the day. It's great to see all the different locations coming in. As we're getting started, it'd be great to know, for our own background and maybe the discussion that we want to have is what role you're playing at your institutions, whether that's in instructional design or as faculty or in some other role, so we can kind of cater to maybe some of the questions you might have around ungrading. So just by way of introductions, my name is Dr. Tyler Watts. I'm at Southern Wesleyan University, which is in the upstate portion of South Carolina. And I'm here with my colleague and kind of research partner. And Karen, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I am Dr. Karen Bunch Franklin, and I am with Georgia Tech, Georgia Institute of Technology in Atlanta, Georgia. And I work mostly in faculty development, but I also teach in instructional technology and education and online education design and assessment.
Thanks, Karen. I said colleague. We're former colleagues, I guess. We both worked at Clemson University together in our online division. And then Karen began her role at Georgia Tech. I moved into a faculty role at Southern Wesleyan University. But we're so glad to have you, and thank you for sharing just your various roles. So to get things started, this is a reflection on implementing ungrading for the first time. As we were discussing before some folks jumped on, this may be a new term for you. So we kind of want to set some foundation for what ungrading is and some of the definitions that we'll be using for that. And then just talk about a research design and the findings of that research design from implementing ungrading for the first time, and then open it up to a discussion with some guided questions to help kind of foster our discussion here at the end of the day. So just for today's session, as I mentioned, a brief overview of our recent research, sharing your own experience if you've tried ungrading or you have some familiarity with it, and then generating ideas for future research. So this may be something based on what we've done. Maybe you want to do some implementation and research of your own, and then some time for question and discussion. At any point, Maureen is our moderator, so she's monitoring the chat. So if you've got questions along the way or want us to discuss something further, just don't hesitate to put those in the chat. So to begin, what is ungrading? And there's a few different terms out there that kind of, depending on who you're asking, it might be a very broad term or it might be a very narrow focus area. And so we put a couple of definitions up here that you can read. I won't read the whole thing, but I did want to highlight what's in red here. So the learning process is centered as students display agency, growth, and take risks in their learning is a key facet of ungrading. And then the practice is more focused on minimizing or potentially eliminating grades in order to focus on meaningful feedback and student learning. Really highlight that last bullet point, that it's really a focus on the process of learning over the product of learning. There's a few different types of what we would call ungrading, or really put it into this spectrum of kind of a larger discussion about alternative grading approaches. And so you may hear things like collaborative grading, where the student and the instructor determine their final grades together. Standards-based grading. So this is giving students multiple opportunities to master a standard. Usually there's the opportunity to resubmit without a penalty, or some kind of logistics to allow for resubmissions. Or then contract or specs grading. So students select their desired grade and then complete a set of required tasks and assignments to get that grade. And so we're kind of using ungrading as kind of a broad umbrella that captures all of these, though each of them has some distinct flares and unique elements around them. And I think it can also be, depending on the discipline, you see some favor in how these are used. So I wanted to just very briefly, especially considering the interest perhaps for a lot of you who are in instructional design, thinking about the research that we did, and talk also a little bit about the design. So this initial research was in a master's in instructional design program. I was the faculty leading that. And so I wanted to try out ungrading. I felt a little nervous about trying that out with undergraduate students at first. And so I had a group of graduate students. They were studying assessment and evaluation, and I thought that was a great opportunity for us to try an alternative assessment. So this was a very small research design, but it had a qualitative case study with all of the online graduate students in a single course. And then we used semi-structured interviews, and just to capture the first experience with ungrading. So all of the students, this was a new concept to them, both for them as learners, and then I did journaling and kind of did an inventory of my own experiences going into it. This was really driven by existing research from Guberman. So if you're interested in kind of experiences of undergraduate students doing online ungraded courses, that's another great study to look at. We are a Canvas school, and so the design approach was driven by Susan Gibbs, who gives a kind of really nice primer of how she's structured ungrading, and she's done it for a number of years. As you can see, this approach that she shared, she's been doing since 2016. And the way it was structured was there's still assignments. They were done as complete or incomplete. And so there was an expectation that you're still doing all the assignments, but they get marked as complete or incomplete with extensive feedback for those assignments. And the only graded components that actually appeared as with a point total in the gradebook was a declaration quiz every week. And this was just a way to make sure that students knew exactly the expectations of what they should be doing each week and confirming, yes, I completed all of those. And then a reflective journal, which was ongoing throughout the course. This was set up as a group discussion, but with each student as their own group, so that it was just a private space where they could reflect and I could respond to that as the instructor. And so those were the graded components that added up to be the 100 points that I used for the gradebook. And this was an existing design as part of our program. And so it was just modifying that design, both to set up a primer for what ungrading was and how it would work in the class, but also to change all of the assignments with some variation in terms of how those assignments were structured for the complete or incomplete, and then adding in those quizzes and the reflective journal component. So just wanted to briefly share about some of the findings. These are all adult learners, graduate students, and was really pleased with some of their responses. So they reported that despite a lot of hesitancy at first, that they were very nervous at the beginning, but they found that as the course progressed, that they had significant learning shifts, and it really changed their mindset about their approach to the assignments and their approach to the coursework. And as well as that, about how they viewed feedback, how they viewed peer work, and the overall projects that they were doing. And I've tried to capture just some of their words here in the red. So it helped me just be more creative as a person and creative in my responses when they were doing the assignments. The next thing that we observed was about control and agency. So they felt that they had greater agency and freedom in how they approached assignments. And that really, thinking back to that quote from David Buck at the beginning about this element of student agency, they really reported that that was something that was strongly felt. And they knew that the grade wouldn't necessarily suffer as they were doing their coursework. And so they felt that they could take risks and also submit things knowing that the first attempt wasn't the end point in terms of their learning journey in the course. And I really like this quote. It allowed me to see some of me in how I respond. One of the respondents was talking about how even when they're working on a project that they felt was really fulfilling and connected to their real life work, they're always kind of in the back of the mind thinking, well, what does the instructor want? And what should I do for that instructor in order to get the grade that I'm really hoping to get? Mm-hmm. And so this response was something that was in a kind of reply to that, in terms of feeling like they had greater ownership over what they were doing in the course. And the last thing I really wanted to highlight was about feedback. So it really shifted from kind of this deficit model of, well, what did I get wrong? How can I improve? I felt I did a really explicit job of trying to scaffold assignments already so that they could get feedback along the way when it was a graded course. But that scaffolding, I think, changed to, okay, how can I improve on this? And what were the things I was doing really well? And how can I continue to grow and develop in this area that the course explored? And then the reflective journals and feedback were viewed as similar or improved to previous course experiences. So they found that that was helpful. And that was something that I felt I really got to know the students in a much deeper way through those journals. And we'll talk about kind of my experience on the upcoming slide related to that as well. And so another quote here, this is about personal growth. It's not so much about the score. And so they really took that as kind of ownership and taking the feedback towards, how can I improve this for my role as an instructional designer or as an educator using technology and the fields that they're working in. For me as the instructor and also the instructional designer for this, I did this course, and then I did another iteration of the course where I went back to graded, and I really felt disconnected when I went back to the graded version and just less motivated. So that was just a really surprising thing that I said, I need to write this down and capture this, because it was just something that as the instructor and just I think it was a nice instructional design challenge to really think of how this would work. And then going back to the graded one, I just felt a little more disconnected from that process. I mentioned the reflective journals, and that's something I've added into any of the courses in our program. In the initial round, I did that as something they did every week, but I changed that to be not as extensive and allow them to kind of jump in when they wanted to for our graduate students. But this just really allowed for a deeper engagement with the instructor. I thought it also, the reporting from students of how much they appreciated that metacognitive reflection that they were able to do and really think about their learning. And so that was a piece that I thought, regardless of how I'm doing assessment, I think this is a valuable thing for our online students to be thinking and engaging with. So that's kind of the experience. I'm going to turn it over to Karen to kind of lead us through the next part.
Yeah, so now we want to take some time to really just reflect on ungrading, generally ungrading as a research topic. And what we'll do is have a couple of minutes to allow everyone to kind of think about the questions that we pose. And then we'll take about 8 or so minutes per question to really just kind of share out and have discussion. So I'm going to set a timer because I'm not good at keeping up with timing on my own. And we'd ask you to just think about the questions we have up here now. So considering your courses that you teach or courses that you help design, could ungrading be an approach that would work for those? And what really, brings your interest to ungrading? So what is drawing you to this session, to maybe researching ungrading, maybe considering ungrading, all of those things? So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes just to think on your own, and then we'll come back together to share out. have about a minute left. Okay. Sure you guys could hear that. It was quite loud. So you're welcome to unmute. I do see some responses in the chat, so I'll start with those. And you're also welcome to unmute and share. So John said he really likes it because it puts the focus on achieving those goals instead of that numerical or letter grade, and the overall GPA. And something that he's also found is that every time you type ungrading, it always autocorrects to upgrading. And so when we're writing our papers, our literature reviews, we always have to make sure that we don't have upgrading in there. Anyway, I agree, John, and that's one of the things that really draws me to ungrading as a strategy and a pedagogy is thinking, just shifting that mindset from grade to learning, I think is so critical. Becky talked about being interested in it and talking to faculty about it, but how do we get out from under that university requirement where you have to put a grade at the end of the day? And while there are some colleges that are all ungrading, it's far and few between in comparison to the number of colleges in the US. So what folks that are avid ungraders tend to do is they meet with the students and they ask students to decide what grade they should receive. And in most of the literature, it's very rare that they have to change a grade from higher to lower. And most often they're increasing the grade because they feel like the student probably graded themselves a little bit more harshly than they would have graded them. So the grade doesn't go away per se, in that it has to be there at the end. But the nice thing about ungrading is you have measurements of learning throughout the semester. And so you have a really good idea of the growth that your students have made as from where they started to where they end. And so I think that gives you a really good way of kind of understanding what grade they should get, involving them in that conversation, giving them that agency to rate themselves, as well as having the body of evidence that they've created throughout the semester to support that.
And Karen, I was just going to chime in there. I should have said we introduced several of those. I used the kind of cooperative grading model that Karen was just describing, where that was a discussion with the students as part of their final reflection. But I know Russ had mentioned like standards-based grading. So there's a few different approaches for how to get to that final grade that becomes like on the transcript that you would report out.
Yes, I agree. And Russ, I think that's probably one of the hardest parts of ungrading is helping students understand that it's okay to not get a grade. And I think that really involves like creating trust from the very beginning and being very transparent with your students about why you're implementing ungrading, what your purpose is for that, and how you see that unfolding throughout the semester. And then I always tell my students, like, my promise to you is that you're going to receive detailed feedback from me and that you're always going to know where you stand in this course. And that if I have any concerns about your performance, I will be reaching out to you. I won't wait till the end of the semester and surprise, you got a C instead of an A like you thought you were getting. So it's really important to be transparent, build trust with your students, and let them know the purpose and the why behind the decisions that you make as far as ungrading is concerned. I do know we have more stuff in the chat, but I also see we have a hand raised. So Helen, I don't know if I'm pronounced Helene.
Yes,
I was not even close.
It's no picnic having our name. In fact, we have a club online. It's called the Miss Hellenius Club, because everybody gives us all kinds of other names. But anyway, it's Helene. Yeah, my field is English as a second language, ESL. So for years, I have tried to implement a very different type of grade. It's still grading in a sense. It isn't what you're calling ungrading, but it's three factors that I weigh in equally: effort, improvement, and achievement. Because students come in at all different levels of knowing the language. And so I'm more interested in how hard they tried, how much they improved, not just can they pass this English test at the end. Mm-hmm. And so I have always tried to put those three elements together, because it's very important that they improved. How could they be evaluated on the same basis, just achievement, as someone whose English was higher? Now, granted, they're going to come in level 1 or level 2 or level 3 or whatever you do your program. But there's always variation within the levels. I'm sure you all know that or remember that from, language learning. But ultimately, there still has to be a grade. So it's probably not really ungrading. But I just wanted to throw in there that we're so focused on achievement that we don't realize these other two pieces are very, very important. And if my students know that I'm taking into account effort and improvement, I think that really helps them have some of what you've been talking about in the chat here with them, a growth mindset and not so much a deficit view. I want to throw that in there.
Yeah, thank you so much. I see Russ has his hand up and we have a couple more minutes on this question. So Russ, I'll let you go really quickly.
I was just going to speak to that situation where the specifications grading really bombed, and I tried to do kind of a post-mortem on it. And I think one of the things that didn't help it was the instructor not being timely with feedback. He was dealing with some other personal issues over that summer session. And I think that really hurt the students having that trust. So student trust is important. I also think that it's kind of a complex system. You need to explain it very simply. And then the other thing was there were a certain group of students, these are master students, learners, that were very grade motivated and high achievers and really weren't all that interested in the feedback. They just want to know, how do I get the top grade? And so I don't know how you get around that, but I do encourage, the instructors to have a very clear explanation and be timely with your feedback.
Yeah, I think that's probably for me, that's one of the hardest challenges is students grades are so ingrained in students starting in the K-12 system. And that's how, it's tied to their scholarship opportunities. It's tied to what college they can get into. Even driving, you get good grade discounts. So grades are so ingrained in them that it's really hard to help students do it. But the one thing that I found is that if I consistently show up, give that feedback in that timely manner, and I let students, I talk about the feedback generally with them, I start to see that transition. And some of them do get quite anxious, but I just keep reassuring them, you're going to do great. Let's quit focusing on what grade you're going to get, and let's focus on this part of the project and making sure that you're understanding it. We do have a couple more questions that we want to go on to, but I did see one more hand raised. So Katie, if you want to talk just real quickly, we'll get your question or comment in. Yeah, I just wanted to share, I am a little biased because Dr. Watts is my teacher. So I have seen the ungrading on the other end. Sorry, I have a guest speaker. But also in my high school classroom, I have started to weave in the ungrading just really lightly because our school does require a specific level of grading. And it's been really powerful in the classroom. And I have noticed that students are less anxious, and I teach ninth grade. So that's a really tumultuous time for teens. And it's been really effective. So I just really enjoy the ungrading method and that style. And it's not all or nothing. You can weave it in. Thanks so much, Katie. I think Tyler's been planning people in the audience the last few conferences. I'm just kidding. He hasn't. But it is fantastic to hear from a student's perspective as well.
And Katie's experience, I think when Helene was sharing, is very similar in that it's, we're focusing on research and writing, and it's an iterative process that you're focused on that process really, that I feel like grading gets in the way of that a little bit when you're wanting to improve writing and organization, some of those things that are a little more intangible. So when Helene was describing her experience teaching for ESL, that really resonated with me for writing as well.
Yeah, I agree. We have another question that we're going to move to, and you can still feel free to continue the conversation in the chat. But what challenges do you see in implementing an ungraded approach? We've already heard a couple of those, but let's think on that for a few minutes. Again, we'll do about 2 minutes and then come back together. Oh, I forgot to give you your minute countdown. We've got about 15 seconds. Okay, so similar to before, we welcome your conversation and suggestions and responses. So you're welcome to unmute and share, or you're also welcome to pop in the chat.
I think one thing that's a challenge is that, like, as a teacher, you're letting go of some of your authority, which I'm a control freak by nature. So, it was really hard to give agency to students, or allow them that agency to, I don't know. So I think when I work with faculty these days, I know that anything that's too loosey-goosey or where they're not in total control, that's bad news. And so that's a tough sell as an instructional designer, I think. But it also, like most really good things, it requires more work, but sometimes that work is just like emotional work. It's not like literally time doing it. And emotional work is way harder than other kinds of work. So anyway, I think that's one of the challenges.
I think that's a fantastic point, Todd. It is. I think it's also especially hard when you weren't taught in that way, where you weren't given that agency or that ownership of your own learning. And so for me, who was, in high school and in college in the 80s and early 90s, it was definitely very lecture based, very traditional. There was no opportunity for student voice or student ownership of learning. No active learning strategies really. And so sometimes it does feel weird. I feel like I have to replicate that. But once you kind of work through that, I think it does make a huge difference in how you approach teaching and learning. So thank you for sharing that. Liz also talked about systemic change. And I agree, it's so hard to think about these systems that are in place and all the politics involved in certain, higher education and K-12 institutions. And how do we get past all of that and make change? And I think it's really just, one of those things where you just have to start small and hope that it builds, right? I mean, ungrading 5 years ago was barely talked about. There were a few folks out there writing about it and talking about it and sharing their experiences, but you didn't see it in a more broad sense. You didn't see it in conferences. You didn't see it on, making inside higher ed articles or things like that. And now we have an entire book on ungrading. So I think it's starting to make more of an impact and make more noise, which can hopefully work across some of those systems and make some positive impacts. I also think the pandemic might have helped with that a little bit, because we started to see where having some flexibility or alternative ways to grade was really beneficial during that piece of time.
And I'll agree that the systems approach, and that's something that I've really been thinking a lot of, right? Because there's two sets of systems, even where we are in higher ed. And I say we, because I think most of us here are from a higher ed perspective, but in higher education, jokingly, the system is the same as it was 2,500 years ago. You talk about lecturing, we haven't really evolved that much in that, but the idea that we have research now that's showing the success of these things, as getting that out. But to me, it's how do you affect the change systematically and with policy and other things. And I think that it's going to take our leadership at the colleges, our leadership at the dean level, to really give faculty the freedoms to fail in some of these things. I think that's often, we're talking about the process of freedom to, I guess, agency, right? The freedom to fail, the freedom to learn in a different way. We're actually almost need to change the system from even the leadership perspective to allow that to happen a little bit with our faculty as well, to try to model that process effectively as we're seeking to push it forward. Because once people realize the value of it, then that change happens. And it, to be honest, also needs to start with leadership and communication from those ends. But yeah, the systems approach is, I'm thinking in terms of, I'm like a policy guy now. I'm finishing up my PhD in a policy program. And so of course, I'm just thinking all of the dismantling of all of these systems and how we can get there. But this is a fantastic question, because not only that, but then our K-12s as well. And they're leading the charge. A lot of them are doing a lot of this in education right now, but then they hit a roadblock when their district needs to give GPAs because the schools are still requiring it as an admissions process. And so I don't know, there's a lot wrapped up here, but I'm glad for the open discussion, because I think it's going to lead us somewhere where we can start finding solutions that are palatable really for everyone.
I think you bring up such an important point, especially when, like, I came from an R1 university, at another R1 university where, research is the key thing and teaching is kind of a back burner. And so how do we help faculty, like you said, be able to take this risk and potentially not go well the first 1 or 2 iterations and feel confident enough that that's not going to ding them so bad that they can't recover? And so I think that is really critical as far as, educating our administrators on the value of approaches like this, and how they can be helpful. So I'm glad that you brought that up. That's a really key point.
There's some
We
great
have a couple more minutes on this one. So go ahead, Tyler. Sorry.
No problem. There's some great literature that's out there as well about, risk taking and how certain faculty are afforded risks, whether that's tenure track or, thinking about adjuncts and, I couldn't possibly do this because I get a master course, or thinking about just demographics and, as someone who's a white male in an assistant professor position, I probably have a lot more leeway to experiment with my courses than some of our colleagues that I'm working with, and how that impacts course evaluations. So I think I think it goes back to what we were just talking about, these systems in place that can really put up barriers to how we might be innovative in any way, but especially in ungrading processes.
All right, we have about a minute or so left. Does anyone have any other final thoughts about challenges before we move on to our last question? All right, if not, we'll go ahead and move on to the next question. And then, you always can add some stuff to the chat. We can come back to it. So thinking about ungrading, we've kind of talked about what interests you about it, how it might be applied in your courses, what challenges might exist, but we also want to think about it from a research perspective. That was kind of our theme of our presentation today, ungrading for the first time. So in what ways might you engage in similar research or design practices around ungrading? And we'll have a couple of minutes of reflection, and then we'll come back together and share out. So ready, set, go. It's your last question, guys. I'm getting really bad at counting you guys down for the individual reflection. My apologies for that. So one of the things I wanted to kind of start with here was just to kind of let you know what our next steps are as researchers considering ungrading. So Tyler conducted his study with his course, and this summer we're going to repeat this study. I'm going to do it at my institution where I teach. He's going to do it at his institution. And we're going to add in some motivation and learning scales as well. Following Guberman's research, we really appreciated how he added in the motivation and learning scales to kind of look at how ungrading might have impacted those as well. And so that's kind of our next steps, but we're really interested to hear if you have any ideas about research. We're always open to collaborations as well. So I'm gonna zip it now and let you guys start to share.
Katie, you had your hand raised? Go ahead.
Yeah. I was just curious if you guys were looking into the secondary level as well, like high school, because if you were, I would love to collaborate on something like that with my students, because I teach high school freshmen, but we're at a polytechnical school. So I do have higher level thinking students, I think, because it is a very rigorous course, well, 4 years. So I would love to collaborate on something if that was something you guys were interested on. So I don't have any direct connections with K-12 at the moment, since I switched institutions, but most of the students that I teach are K-12 teachers. I would say I occasionally have 1 or 2 students that are not K-12 teachers, but most of my students work in the K-12 arena. And so it would be interesting to see how they feel about ungrading when we implement it. And then maybe there could be some ways to create some connections that way to say, if you're interested in looking at this within your K-12 environment, we could create some sort of collaboration that way. I think that would be fantastic, because the literature does show that there are successful ungrading courses in the K-12 system. Yeah, at my school site, they're doing a whole book club about alternative grading styles, and because traditionally our school has just really done the cut and dry. A is 10%, B 10%, and then the 50% and below is F. And so about half the school is really interested in changing their grading methods, and then the other half is really digging in their heels. So it'd be interesting to see how they respond to something like ungrading, or just taking components from it and putting it in their current practices.
Yeah, I agree. And wouldn't it be fantastic if we could, start in high school and help students learn to focus more on the growth and the learning, and just imagine the experiences they would have in college if that was their focus versus what do I have to do to get an A? And so, yeah, I agree. Well, we'll definitely, I know Tyler's got your contact information, so we'll definitely keep you in the loop and see if there might be some ways that we could collaborate that way. That would be fantastic. And Todd shared some wonderful links on specification grading in the chat. So I would encourage you to pull those up and take a look at those as well. Thank you, Todd, for sharing those. We have about 3.5 minutes or so. So I was just curious if anyone else has any ideas about implementing or researching ungrading in their practices.
I'd just like to say that this session was a great example of people presenting, but also allowing space for us to contribute and learn from each other and give each other links. I just think that was a great spirit for this session. Thank you.
Thank you, Helene.
Yes, thank you so much. David, were you about to share something?
Yeah, I'm thinking of this. I'm very second week new to my new role at the community college that I'm working in. But one of the things that we're looking at is the kind of this holistic transition experience of students through and then kind of graduating and kind of moving on, and wondering what something like this is, if we're thinking about a And I'm thinking specifically about like a college 101, like strategies type class, and doing it in a different modality. And then looking at persistence and other kind of measures, actually thinking more quantitatively around some of those things, and actually wondering what kind of, if there is research out there on that, and if not, if that might be something that we could potentially partner on and kind of chat through at some point, just because I think that we're starting to see this push so strongly for standards-based micro-credentials. I mean, however you want to frame a lot of these things, we're definitely getting there. But I definitely keep the contact info you guys are putting up here. But it's a huge lift that we're looking at, and trying to figure out how we can then work on efficacy and actually show something like this, if this is something the college would be willing to implement long term. But yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm in our slide presentation that Tyler uploaded to Discord. We do also have 2 slides that are chock full of resources on ungrading. So blogs, social media, books, podcasts, videos. I think we have quite the little, I can't think of the word I'm trying to think of. I'm trying to think of anyway, we have a bunch out there. So feel free to check those out. Feel free to share more in the Discord channel as well to add to this list. And so
I'll also try, I just saved the chat, so I'll try to incorporate anything that's been shared from the group, put that on another slide so that you have those captured as well.
Oh, perfect. That's fantastic. Yeah, and then we'll also have our contact information in there as well on the very last slide. So please feel free to connect with us. We're always interested in collaborations and sharing knowledge and working with everyone. So we really enjoyed the conversation. Thanks so much, everyone, for coming at the very last session of the day. Thanks for jumping in and sharing your thoughts via chat or through unmuting. I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference, and we look forward to maybe hearing from you in the future.
Thank you, everyone.
Great conversation and great resources. Thank you so much. We'll stay on for 2 more minutes. And so if you have any last questions, feel free.
I was curious if there's any research comparing